Thank you for clicking in too. Explore the far-reaching impacts of the choices we make, one conversation at a time. This is the Ripple Effect. Today, we are diving in on the engine that drives the American economy, trucking. And with us today, we have Dillon Abruzzese. And we're thankful to have Dillon on here because we've been trying to get a truck driver for a while to come on and talk about all the things that have been happening since the pandemic, where things went real crazy. People were at home. People were buying a lot of stuff. Freight was moving like crazy and prices were great. But things have changed since then. There has been a lot of competition and so forth. So we want to dive into that and see how things are right now and where they might be going in the future. With that, we just want to get Dillon to go ahead and introduce himself so that we can get a little bit of a history on him, how long he's been in the trucking industry and what he does in it and so forth. So with that, Dillon, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been in, and what have you done exactly in the industry so that people get a more of a breast idea of what your experience is.
Gotcha. My name is Dillon Abruzzese, originally from Brooklyn, New York, down here in Florida permanently. Licensed driver for over 4 or 5 years now. Freight brokerage owner. Did pretty much everything in the industry, from driving all the way to dispatch and logistics and brokerage.
So what kind of driving did you do? Did you do freight, reefer, or what driving mode did you do most?
So it was mostly dry van, drop and hook.
Okay.
I didn't run reefers. I'm not a fan. It's hard to sleep. So that's basically that. Yeah, mostly a lot of Amazon loads, UPS, FedEx, things like that.
And for people that don't really understand what trucking actually does to the economy or how it integrates with the economy, can you give a little bit more of an idea of what the trucking industry really does for the economy?
Pretty much everything. Just this microphone that we're talking on right now came by truck. If you had a bowl of cereal this morning, it came by truck. So without logistics, without trucks running on the roads, nothing's happening. The country's at a standstill.
Right. And so when the pandemic happened and we had all the people staying at home and they were ordering everything from Amazon, as you said, and other places, how was the trucking industry at that time?
During the pandemic, it was really good for drivers. The rates were where they should be generally. Diesel was priced appropriately, under $3 a gallon for the most part of the country, other than California. Everything was pretty good during the pandemic. There were a lot of routes to run, a lot of shipments going east to west and north to south. So it slowed down a little bit since then because, the rates have gone through the floor for the most part. And, diesel was hitting $5 and change a gallon easily. So that really took a negative toll on the industry itself.
So you talked about rates per mile being, or freight, being, usually it's done by rates per mile if I'm
Yes.
correct. What was it during the pandemic, and what was it just before that?
During the pandemic, you could easily find routes for $3 and change a mile all the way up to $15 a mile. It was a big spread, but you wouldn't really find anything lower than $4 a mile.
Okay.
Gross.
And prior to that?
Prior to that, we're at maybe $2 and change right now.
No, I mean prior to the pandemic, maybe in 2018, 19.
Oh, gotcha. About the same, a little bit lower. Your rates went up during the pandemic, and then sort of stagnated at that point, and then have been coming down from there. But pre-pandemic, I would say between 3 and 5 average. During the pandemic, 4 to over 10, and then now between 2 and 3, I would say average.
And a lot of people speculate that that's because of all the influx of people trying to capitalize on that boom that we had during the pandemic. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of recruiters for the mega carriers, and they're blowing a lot of smoke. We're going to need 80,000, 100,000 new drivers by 2 years from now, things like that. Everybody saw other guys making money, So there was a big rush into the industry, a lot of unqualified and inexperienced people. You have to learn and start somewhere, but a lot of the reason that the rates have tanked is because you'll have drivers willing to take, $2 a mile loads. Meanwhile, a few years ago, nobody would even touch that. It's just not worth the time or diesel.
Right, because you also have a cost per mile, basically.
Absolutely.
What do you think the cost per mile is roughly right now?
Right now, about $1 and change or so.
Okay, so you don't have much overhead, basically, or you don't have much profit margin there.
The margin isn't great right now at all. And it also varies, depending on if you're an owner-operator and you're paying your own maintenance and all of that. You're paying your own diesel, your insurance, all your own overhead versus if you're driving for a mega carrier like CR England or CRST where everything's
Prime,
covered. And
whatever.
Prime, yeah, Swift, exactly.
Okay. You also mentioned in there the cost of maintenance has gone up, I'm pretty sure. How much has that gone up since maybe prior to the pandemic? Do you know?
Not necessarily substantially, but I mean, we're talking, we have 18 tires on a truck, and at $400 or $500 a pop, just getting a nail in your tire could ruin a route easily, and if you don't have a mobile mechanic or a good network across the country and you end up at a travel center trying to get a tire fixed, you could end up waiting there for 15 hours just to get a new tire. So it's really more, it's not necessarily the monetary, but more the time wise that's an issue.
I was reading that one of the two top issues within the trucking industry are fluctuation in fuel prices, as you mentioned, and also the lack of truckers. But you're saying that there isn't a lack of truckers right now, or there was a flux of unqualified to enter the market that's driving down the rates.
Yeah,
there seems to be a contradiction there.
Yeah, so I'm not seeing any lack of drivers at all. There's a thought that there is a lack of drivers, and that's really recruiters trying to make a paycheck. Saying, "Oh, we need X amount of drivers because these many guys are retiring," or whatever the case. The more guys they bring on board, the more trucks they have running, the more money they make.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily about a driver shortage. It's just trying to generate income.
Yeah, what do you think has driven up the diesel rates over the last 4 to 5 years?
I would say politics for the most part. Other than the politics on oil and gas and things like that, there's not really any rhyme or reason as to why diesel went up. The same as to say for a regular gasoline for your car.
Yeah, are there any hybrid trucks running on the road these days, or any pure E trucks?
They're trying to develop electric and hybrids, but I don't see that happening anytime within the next 10 years. We just don't have the infrastructure for it.
Right. Have you seen one actually on the road?
I've seen one Tesla truck in a million miles.
Any horror stories?
No, other than, just trying to make a 300-mile run and running out of juice. It's
doesn't seem too economic.
I was reading the OTR, over the road truckers. Their average is like 1,300 miles for a load. I was thinking, how are you going to get an electric truck to do that? It almost seems impossible.
Yeah, I mean, for local routes, maybe even regional routes, electric may make sense, depending on the size of your company and your infrastructure. But there's no charging stations. You're not going to go out to Winnemucca, Arizona, and find a charging station when your battery's running dead.
Right. And is that how the trucking industry is broken down, from people who do like local area movement to like regional and to the long haul?
Yeah. So there's local routes, which are just local warehouse to, say, a supermarket, a Publix or a Kroger. And then there's regional, which would be, say, the East Coast or the Midwest or the West Coast. And then there's OTR, which just covers
everything,
all 48 on the mainland.
Can you cross into Mexico or Canada?
You can. It's just in my opinion, not worth it. There's too much red tape for all of that.
And what type of driving were you doing when you were driving?
I was driving over the road. So
Wow.
I was out for 4 weeks, and then I'd come home for 5 or 6 days. Out for 4 weeks, come home.
Yeah, that seems like a tough way to do that job. If anything, locally, where you kind of get home every night.
Locally makes more sense if you have a family, but it doesn't pay as well as OTR. The highest paying is OTR. So if you want to make money in trucking, then you need to be running.
What's the average salary for an OTR? Does that or does it depend on where you live?
It varies by region. The average salary, if you're driving, I would say 80 to 100. If you're really running, my best year I did a little over 200. So you could make money, but then again, it comes down to the routes. If the truck isn't moving, you're not getting paid. And a lot of the mega carriers, they're not paying great rates. They're paying maybe 50, 60 cents a mile to their drivers, so you would have to run from New York to California and back to make a decent paycheck, and do that every week.
Yeah. And you mentioned the word reefer. What does reefer mean?
It's the refrigerated trucks,
Oh.
basically, that produce all your vegetables and different spoilage kind of stuff. Yeah, temperature-controlled trucks. It's like a big refrigerator on wheels is the best. But from what I understand, it's a lot more work. A lot of times they have you unloading and loading and a lot more things. So it doesn't really pay off in the long run for some people.
And you were doing this when you were doing the long haul. You were owner-operator, correct?
No, I was working for a company out of Philadelphia.
So they're not going to pay you a salary. They're going to pay you something like per hour or per mile, something like that?
The way I was getting paid was 30% of gross. So some companies will pay you per mile
Gross of what you're carrying?
of the load. Yeah. So if
The value of the load.
if the load is paying $10,000, then I would take home $3,000 pre-tax.
And that $10,000 is the charge that the shipper is charging for whoever's getting it at the end.
Exactly.
Okay.
And were you paying your costs as far as were you leasing your vehicle from them and all that other stuff, or were you buying your own?
No, I didn't have any maintenance or anything like that. So it worked out. I got a pretty sweet deal on that gig.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're saying that you didn't own the truck. It was their truck. You just got paid 30%.
Yes, 30% of gross.
Did that cover, was gas something that you had to take care of, or that's something outside of it?
No, the company covers, they cover insurance, they cover fuel, they cover pretty much everything.
So you took home 30% minus taxes. That's how it kind of worked.
Yes, exactly.
That doesn't seem like a bad gig, $200,000.
It's not bad at all. It's not bad at all. There's, in my opinion, there's certain demographics that would do better in trucking. I would recommend if you're 21 years old, you don't have a family, no wife, no kids at home, get out on the road, run for a couple years, save up, save everything. You could either own your own truck afterwards or move into something else. Or, say an older couple, somebody in his 60s with his wife, or the wife with her husband, and they want to travel the country. They're retired, so they just do it for, living expenses, basically.
So they don't own a home. You can buy some sort of truck you kind of live in.
Yeah.
And they just travel the roads, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't have any personal overhead when you're on the truck. You're not paying rent and electric and water and all of that. You're just covering your food and fuel.
Now, if you're 21 and you wanted to enter the market as an owner-operator, is getting financing for a truck a difficult thing?
It's not very easy. It's not much more difficult than getting financing when you're young on anything, without credit history and things like that. But there are ways around it. If you have a good down payment on it, then it wouldn't be hard to get financing. If you have work history, so if you've been with a company running for a couple years, then you'll have companies much more willing to give you financing on a truck. But these rigs are $200,000-$300,000, so it's not like you're going to buy a Kia.
Right.
Has the prices come down on them? Since I know in the pandemic there was ridiculous prices on the trucks. Has it stabilized now?
It's come down a little bit, but that's mostly from That's mostly from drivers who thought they wanted to run on a truck, bought a truck, saw everybody else making money, and then realized they didn't want to do it, so they ended up selling their truck at a discount. It's not necessarily the manufacturers or the dealers that are lowering the prices of the trucks.
So it's just the excess that's being sold off by people leaving the industry, maybe.
Exactly.
You know, we never asked you is you said you got into trucking right before the pandemic.
Yep.
Why?
In
Why did
2018.
you? Yeah. Why did you get into it? Well, you didn't know the pandemic was coming,
No.
so there had to be a reason.
I had a friend of mine from Philadelphia, and he was making good money. You know, pulling in, $3,000-4,000 a week easily. It seemed like a good gig. You don't hear about the negatives when you're researching it until you actually experience the negatives.
Mhm.
So most people, they'll see it and they say, okay, you see a paycheck for $12,000 for the month, $15,000 for the month, and they say, okay, I could do this. And then you're out there for 5 weeks at a time. It weeds you out really quickly.
You mean a person physically, or physically with respect to family issues? Leaving people behind for that period of time. What weeds you out? What's the hardest part of it?
It's definitely physically draining. It's mentally draining. You have the family aspect, like you're saying. But most people aren't able to sit in one place and drive for 10, 11 hours a day. Every day, rain or shine, snow, no matter what. You get up, you sit there, you drive. You stop, you take your half an hour break, you stop, maybe use the bathroom. But for the most part, you're just running, because that's how you're getting paid. If you're not running, you're not getting paid. So there's an emotional drain, knowing that your family's back home or friends are back home. You'll see, you'll speak to a cousin and he'll say what great weekend he had or whatever, and you're in the middle of Wyoming by yourself.
Oh, so this is not a 9-to-5 job. 5 days a week. This is 7 days a week.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I sit for 8 hours a day at my job. How's that different from sitting in a truck on a nice comfy chair bouncing up and down? That seems like more fun.
See, that's what my wife used to say. My wife used to assume that you're sitting in it's sort of akin to like an RV. So you're in a lazy boy just cruising down the road.
Got the tunes on.
Exactly. It's not like that at all. The trucks are loud. They rattle, they shake. You have to you can't let your guard down. You can't zone out really necessarily, because God forbid there's an accident.
Mm-hmm.
God forbid you cause an accident.
Or someone cuts you off.
Someone cuts you off, and yeah.
Or decides to run into you while you're turning.
Yeah, and sitting down at a computer all day is different from having to be alert
Exactly.
every minute of the day. That is mentally draining.
Exactly. It is.
Plus, you're kind of there by yourself. You don't have much interaction with other people. If you work in an office, you probably get up and talk to somebody occasionally, maybe.
No. So, I mean, when you're out there, when you're running, your social interaction is buying a cup of coffee and speaking to the clerk. And I've seen guys stand there and have 20, 30-minute conversations with the clerk just because there's nobody else to speak to.
You would think with technology and in what you can do with your phone that has kind of come down a little bit. Well, I'm not saying you're looking at your phone, talking to your wife, looking at her face, but I'm saying while you're driving, you certainly can have a conversation. Over the you can do what do you call that? Yeah. Connecting to the speakers of your car. Bluetooth. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse. It really is, because, I mean, when you're speaking to a loved one and then you want to see them and okay, I'm not going to see you for 3 weeks, it's sort of when you hang up the phone, now you're alone again, or your schedules are different. So you may be running between midnight and 10 a.m. and they're sleeping. And by the time you're done driving, you want to sleep. So you're not up on the phone talking to them while they're awake. So it's really, it's a toss-up.
Would you do it again, knowing what you know now? Would you, at that, let's say you can go back to 2018, would you step into this market?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If the rates were where they should be right now, I would run again.
So now you're into brokerage side of it?
Yeah. So,
When did you make that transition and why?
so I was on the road, I was running, and I was getting paid well. And when you're driving, all you have is time to think. So you're constantly thinking about, how could I do this? How could I invest in that? How could I make money without actually physically driving? So you also start building a network of people, like-minded people in the industry, between shippers and other carriers and other drivers and things like that. So I was out running, and it was just taking a toll, mentally and physically. A couple times I had my ankles swell up, just from not moving. So I tried to figure out how I could get paid about the same to actually not drive, and the easiest way to do that was to broker loads.
What exactly is that?
You middleman the loads, basically. So you'll have a shipper that needs a load to go from New York to California. They're willing to pay $4 a mile. You contract with a carrier, a driver, that's willing to accept $3.50 a mile. So you make the spread in between. So you're making 50 cents, $1 a mile, but you're not actually driving.
So as long as you get more drivers, contracts, and so forth, that's where you make your money.
Exactly.
Okay.
How do you put together those relationships with the shippers and the carriers? First, are most of your carriers owner-operators?
All of my carriers are owner-operators, yeah. Yeah.
And so how do you get to know them, and then how do you get the relationship with the shippers who want to call you and say, hey, you got any carriers available?
So there's a couple different routes you could go for that. It could be personal relationships. If you know somebody that owns a business and they do shipping frequently, a lot of routes that you're running, you run into the same people. So you'll pick up a load from the same shipper multiple times throughout your career, and then you just start becoming friendly with them, things like that, or personal connections. I run a couple routes for a family member of mine who ships from California to Colorado, plant nutrients, twice a week. So that was an easy gig for me to get because it's a family member, and
As a driver?
As a broker.
Okay.
As a broker, yeah. So I would contact an old friend of mine's, maybe even somebody I met on the road as I'm at a truck stop, and let them know, hey, I have this load going from Y to Z. Are you in the area? Can you take it? Then there's also load boards, the DAT load board, where you literally will find shippers that are looking to have a load shipped, and then you link them up with a driver or a carrier as well.
But the carriers or the driver have to be local as well. Otherwise, if they're on the other side of the country, it's not worth it.
Exactly.
So how do you find Is there a website for carriers, let's say, for the greater Philadelphia area that you can go to?
So they're called load boards. The DAT load board is the main load board, and it'll have a list of every shipment that needs to go out, and that's handled by the shipping department of the company itself. And then you'll have a list of carriers in the area. So, some loads, you'll have a driver deadhead. A deadhead is when you're driving from point A to point B, but you don't have a load with you. So you're empty. And they'll drive from New York to New Jersey to pick up a load that's going from New Jersey to wherever. But they don't get paid between New York and New Jersey. They don't get paid for the deadhead. So it's a give and take with the carrier. If the carrier knows that they're going to make good money per mile, they'll take that 100-mile
hit.
Yeah, exactly. And you average it out over the trip, and that's what they'll get paid per mile.
So when you're talking about this log, is this the spot market, or is this something just for contracts?
Yeah, it's spot market.
Okay.
Yep.
So do you do most of your stuff off the spot market, or most of your things are done with contracts?
When you're starting a brokerage, almost everything is spot market, and then you start building relationships, and you'll start seeing recurring shipments and things like that. And that's when you want to have a personal relationship with the shipping department of the company. Then you could basically lock down, you call it a dedicated route. So you are the carrier that will take this load this time of week or this time of month from point A to point B. And it's that way the entire time, as long as nothing bad happens. You know, no accidents or damage to product or anything like that.
What's the advantages between the spot market and the contracts? Or disadvantages?
So with the spot market, you could have a company, a shipper that needs to get a load somewhere, and they're willing to pay more because it's urgent. With a contract, they're willing to pay X amount of dollars, and if you have nobody willing to take it, then you're not getting paid on it. You have to ask the shipper to raise the price, raise the rate. Otherwise, it's not getting moved.
If I understand this correctly, the spot market is kind of like where shippers and carriers are just get together and vie for a price to move the product, and it can be done instantly.
Yeah.
And tell me if I'm wrong. As opposed to a contract where you just said it's a shipper who says, I'm going to do this for the next 2 months. This is what I'm paying. Find somebody who'll do it for me.
Yes.
I'm simplifying it, but is that kind of how it works?
Yeah. So with a contract, for example, one of my carriers I would have a contract with, I would pay them $3.50 a mile. So if the going rate for the market ended up being $4 a mile, they're losing. Technically, but if the going rate for the market ended up being $2.50 a mile, I'm still paying them $1 above. So it's a way for them to guarantee they know exactly what their income will be. Mm-hmm. The one thing they can't control is diesel, and that's what really affects the overhead.
And for that $4.50 a mile price, the owner-operator is responsible for their own gas. Their gas comes out of that amount. Yes. So the fluctuations in the diesel is on them.
Yes.
As a broker, you don't take that risk.
No.
And as a shipper, the shipper isn't taking the risk.
The shipper doesn't take the
risk. Because they're paying $4.50 a mile.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly. And there's a negative stigma with brokers right now for the past couple of years, actually, because people believe that we're thieves. Basically, that we're making money that we're not entitled to make because we're not doing the actual driving itself. And sometimes that makes sense because you do have brokers that are really robbing drivers. They'll get a load that the shipper's paying $5 a mile and they'll offer $1.50, $2, and they're making that spread. But most brokers, on a load, they're only making a couple $100. It's not like nobody's getting rich,
Why, if somebody, well, first of all, the carrier doesn't know that the shipper's offering $5, and if they're being offered $1.50 a mile, why would a carrier even contemplate taking that?
Competition. It's the competition's basically a race to the bottom.
Yeah, And I would think that's more local than on somebody who does OTR, because you can do that locally because those people are kind of in a pinch. If a person is going across the road, they probably own their own and they can turn down loads. Would that kind of be a correct assumption?
For the most part, yeah. There's just there's so much competition. There's so many drivers willing to take cheap freight that it destroys it for everybody else.
Yeah, and so if that actually exists, then we do not have a shortage of truckers. Because if you've had a shortage of truckers, that wouldn't happen. Because that broker offering $1.50 a mile wouldn't be able to offer that.
Exactly.
He wouldn't get any business.
Exactly.
So that just proved the point. There isn't a shortage.
I don't think there is a shortage.
Okay.
I personally don't.
I was going to ask you if there's competition in your market. Then I thought, when is AI going to come into this? When is what you do going to be phased out by the internet? Because I used to work in an industry that was open outcry. I used to work in the financial markets.
Same here.
And that absolutely got phased out when trading went online. Pretty much overnight, everybody who was working there was out of a job. Not exactly overnight, but it would seem that matching truckers, carriers, and shippers can't be that hard especially if you have an application on your phone that links to some online program, and then they get to pick on their phone. I don't know if does that actually exist right now?
Yeah. So it's gotten a lot easier to find loads
Without a broker.
Without a broker. That's why. So with a husband and wife team, it makes a lot of sense because you could have your co-driver or your partner finding the loads. Looking up on the load boards. You're in Oklahoma. Okay, we found one here. Let's go pick this up. Versus when you're just driving alone by yourself, you're trying to do 3 things at once. So to get loads has been made much easier with technology. As far as AI and driverless trucks and things like that, I don't see that happening within the next 10 years.
I've read that. What is right now the role of AI in the trucking industry?
As far as
as far as like you said, finding loads, is AI helping truckers do anything? Like, I know that AI is involved in tracking the miles. Like, they put something on your truck, so it tells how many miles you've actually driven. Is there any positive advantage of AI currently right now in the trucking market?
I'm not really sure what you mean.
Skip it.
He's asking if there's any kind of like AI programs or assistance that makes you easier for you to find loads and do business with that.
I mean, I'm sure there are. I'm not aware of any, say, apps or anything like that. That'll specifically find loads for you. If there aren't any apps like that, somebody needs to develop one because they'll make good money on that. I'll tell you that much.
So as a broker, you're the one that shifts through all this information, and that's what we got to kind of highlight. Is it's probably not just a simple like, oh, I'm going to Dallas, and I'm going to look through these 50 loads that are possibly here and pick one. It's probably several hundred loads or more. So it would take. How long does it take you to figure out some of these things? What's the best load? How to mix match up everything and make it work?
I mean, it depends on experience, like when you're first starting out with anything, it takes a lot longer than when you know what you're doing for a purpose. Personally, I would be looking at the rates immediately. I filter based on rates because if it's not worth it financially, there's no reason to even look at it. I'm not going to entertain it. But there's no shortage of loads, and there's no shortage of drivers. It's just what the carriers are willing to accept and what the shippers are willing to pay. That's really what it comes down to.
So the pay part. So if you look at the charts, they say that the freight amount of freight that's being shipped by charts is roughly about the same. It peaked during the COVID time when everyone was at home. It peaked big time. But it's basically reestablished back to what it was in 2018-19. But the prices per load are significantly cheaper. So other than there being an excess of people taking those cheaper loads, what else could there be that's causing the price to be down?
I think the only thing that I'm seeing is just a saturation of drivers. And again, there's a lot of different people saying that there's a trucking shortage.
Yeah.
And
I went online. I typed in what are the 10 biggest issues facing the trucking industry, and I went to different look like credible websites, and all of them had varying prices in gas as number one, and diesel. And the other one is number two was always shortage of truck drivers. There was a national website for truck drivers, so I didn't go to like just some random site to get it. And so the information it seems like we're getting out in the public sphere is different from what you're getting on the ground. And I wonder if that's intentional. And that's a rhetorical question, but it seems like it is to drive people into the market to drive down prices because it sounds like there is no shortage of truck drivers.
So as of right now, I don't think there is, like you're saying. In the future, in the next couple of years, potentially, just like any industry, when you have a large group of people retiring, you need people to take their place. But But as of there being a shortage right now, or for the past couple of years, I just don't see that.
Yeah,
I
when
really
I was
don't.
talking about AI, the thing I was thinking about is like ADIS, where you can avoid accidents by that type of technology. And another one was electronic logging device.
Yep.
So that's the types of AI, and I was wondering if that makes life a little bit easier for truckers, or is it more of a hassle?
That's not AI.
That's not AI. Okay, then I'm mixing up my acronyms here. All right,
takes decision for you, like
All right.
self-driving car.
gotcha.
So with a lot of the new trucks, they do have the crash avoidance system and all of that. You'll hear bells and whistles. It may even apply the brakes for you. But a lot of that is overkill. People that drive trucks and actually drive, we know how to drive. You know, we know our speed, we know our weight. We see our distance between us and the car ahead of us. We don't need the truck to automatically slow down for us. So a lot of those type of features are a hassle. A lot of drivers don't like them at all. As far as like ELDs and logs, it's easier than paper logs, but there's downsides to it as well. That
One thing I heard during the pandemic was there was a lot of foreign companies. I know some people in the trucking industry, and they said that they were having problems because they couldn't compete with foreign companies that do not reside in America, hiring and changing the e-logs. So people could run way past the time, pick up more loads, and they just couldn't compete with those because of the regulations in America. Did you see any of that at all?
Absolutely. I actually spoke with a driver who is just getting off the road. He's been driving for a long time, and he was talking about he had to make it home for Christmas, and he ran from SeaTac, Seattle, Tacoma, Washington, to Salt Lake City, to El Paso, Texas, El Paso to Las Vegas, Las Vegas to San Diego, and he didn't stop. So he would call his dispatch, and the dispatch would just change the log. If he ran out of time, they'd go in and they'd give him a brand new clock. If he got caught, he would probably be in trouble. God forbid he got into an accident, or somebody got hurt or killed. Then there's criminal charges for that. But I mean, and that's another thing, as far as rates. If the rate's paying a good amount of money and you're out of time. For example, if you have a quick run, your dispatch calls you and says, hey, I have this load, it needs to go 200 miles, but they're willing to pay $10 a mile, and you're out of time, do you want to make, the close to $1,000 to run a couple hundred miles? A lot of people will do it. A lot of foreign companies especially.
Actually, are you saying that you're only allowed a certain amount of hours a day to drive?
Yeah.
What is that?
So you're allowed 14 hours on duty, and you're allowed 10 hours to drive with a half an hour, 30-minute mandatory break. So that's...
So you can drive, when you say 14 hours on duty, I can drive, if I need to haul a load, if I'm actually on the clock, I can drive for 14 hours.
You could drive for 10 hours.
10 hours.
The other 4 hours are for your pre-trip inspection, your post-trip inspection, anything having to do with the truck, getting fuel, things like that. Other than that, you're supposed to be technically, it's called sleeper berth, which is your sleeper cabin in the back of the truck. So you'll change from on duty to off duty to sleeper berth. But again, there's guys that'll run 20 hours straight on 16 Red Bulls, and there's guys that do other things.
How do they track? Is that where the ELD comes in? How they track how many hours you actually drive?
Yeah. So years ago, before ELD, it was just paper logs, which was easy to change. A lot of guys would carry several different logbooks. God forbid they got pulled over by DOT. They would show them the handwritten logbook that shows that they're doing everything legitimately. If the DOT investigated and said, okay, well, how did you get from New York to California in 9.5 hours? Then they might try to, they might figure out what's going on. But for the most part, it was easy to fake logs with paper logs, much more difficult with the e-logs. But then, like you were saying, you have foreign companies that don't necessarily abide by the rules, and they'll go and they'll just change it all right on the computer.
You mean you gave an example where a company said, I really need this moved. It's a 200-mile run. I'm paying $10, $10 a mile. Did you say?
Yeah.
And the person that's already had his 10 hours, he decides it's worth $1,000 or whatever it is. How does he actually do that if everything's electronic? How do you fudge that or show or not show that you're driving that extra 200 miles?
You call your dispatch and you tell dispatch that you need more time, and they'll go in and they'll literally change the log. They'll reset your clock.
And that's legal?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
So I hear these companies also, when I was talking to a couple of them, they said that they'll change the actual driver. They'll have multiple drivers for like a team driver, he says, but there's actually only one driver in the vehicle.
Yeah.
But they're registered as team drivers, and they'll switch those people so they can keep on running constantly.
Yep, that's another way to do it, exactly.
And how are these foreign companies making bundles? I don't understand that aspect.
They basically are the dispatch.
Yeah.
So they're the broker, and they hired out the contract drivers. And since they're outside of the country, they can't really be regulated as well or followed up on. And if they do get closed down, they just open up another business and do it again. So that's what they were doing during the thing, from what I understand, is why a lot of people lost their jobs in America, because these foreign companies were allowed to run from outside of the country and run like these scams like this to do more work for them.
Meaning that their e-logs could not be monitored?
They could be monitored, but they would have to be monitored in person. So you would have to get pulled over by DOT for an inspection where they want to look at your logs.
Mm-hmm.
Then they would have to investigate and dig through it. But most of the time, as long as your clock looks correct on the surface, they don't really dig much deeper. Unless they have, a little bit of a hunch or intuition, or, the guy looks like he hasn't slept in 2 days, things like that. There's another way that you'll have carriers, they'll have several different MC numbers, motor carrier numbers. It's your DOT identification. And you'll see trucks running down the road, and they'll have basically a printed out piece of paper taped on the side of their truck with a different DOT number. So they'll have a driver named Dillon. He's driving for company XYZ. He runs out of time. He takes his little piece of paper, goes out, tapes it onto the door with a different MC, and now he's able to run again for a different company.
Yeah, I heard this is what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, how is that possible? And why is there an e-log if they can do this kind of thing?
It's supposedly for ease of use.
I thought this all came into play to regulate drivers so they weren't tired when driving these large vehicles with heavy loads and causing accidents and so forth. But it seems to be if you can just reset the log, this kind of negates the whole purpose of it.
So it negates the purpose if you don't get caught. If you get caught, then you'll lose your license. Then you'll lose if you own the MC, then you'll lose your motor carrier company. So it's a risk reward, basically. Some guys, they're willing to take the risk of losing their license, or God forbid, they get into an accident and somebody dies, now they're getting charged with manslaughter and things like that. They'll take that risk if the money is right. Because really, it's only, the way they think about it, it's only illegal if they get caught. That's really what it comes down to.
And it also sounds like no one's going to dig backwards, meaning you take that risk today, you get by it. You drive your 200 miles, now that's in your rearview mirror. 2 weeks from now, if the DOT pulls you over and everything's legit, they're not going to go back 2 weeks to figure out what you did in the past. They're only worried about the now,
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
Exactly. And that's where it comes down to. If you have the DOT officer and he reads your logs and you tell him you left Salt Lake City and you're in New Mexico, how'd you do it in 3 hours? It's up to the DOT officer to put those things together, and figure that out. But once they do, you're not driving ever again, so that's the risk.
And when you lose your license, Is it always gone, or can you get it back?
You could get it back. It depends on the circumstance.
Yeah.
It depends on what you lost it for, you know. So you'll definitely have marks on your license and things like that. And even if you do get it back, a lot of carriers don't want to hire you, you know. So finding a job will be almost impossible because you have accidents, or you have, you know, you were running your clock illegally, or, you know, just a myriad of bunch of different things that it could be.
That's kind of messed up when you actually work for a company that's, you know, promoting these kind of ideas, and then you lose a job and you can't be, you know, with another company because of it.
Yep.
What kind of challenges are you seeing still at this point as an owner and a brokerage?
Just the cheap freight. That's the only thing that's really a negative in my opinion. Diesel's coming down, so I'm bullish on the market for the next couple years, especially with the new administration coming in. I think that we're gonna have a pullback on prices for diesel, so I think that's gonna be a net positive. The negative that I see is if everybody's taking $1.50 a mile loads, you know, to get paid well on them, it's almost impossible. You know, you can't ask a shipper to pay you what you should be getting paid if you have somebody sitting right next to you willing to do it for half the price. And that's really what it comes down to. You know, the regulations, I think, need to be more on, I hate to say it because it would sort of make it not like a free market necessarily, but I feel like there needs to be a baseline, or at least a regulation on rates that themselves, so they're within a certain window to make it economically feasible for everybody.
Okay. But I mean, wouldn't people basically phase out those that are running those low rates are going to go out of business regardless at some point? They can't just take a negative loss for too long before they go out. But one thing you said is like you think the new administration is going to bring in lower gas prices, but we also see there's a lot of talk about tariffs, and that'll be what kind of things are shipped in. Do you see that maybe if tariffs are, you know, a thing, will there be so much freight going around?
International freight, I don't see it slowing down even with the tariff. I believe the purpose of the tariffs would be to get these companies to manufacture here in the States, which no matter what, at the end of the day, when you produce something, it needs to be delivered somewhere, whether it's around the corner or it's across the country. Either way, it needs to be carried by a truck, you know, or an airplane to a truck. So either way, I don't see the market slowing down at all. I'm bullish on rates. I think rates will go up, and I'm thinking diesel is going to come down to a reasonable level. It already has in the past year or two to an extent, but I think we could see sub $3 on diesel.
You know, I was thinking about when you're talking about international, it's not only the rates and fluctuations in diesel that affect the trucking industry. I remember what just went on in, I think it was early October, with the strike, the longshoreman strike at the Port of Baltimore, Maryland. It's kind of like a ripple effect. That when they go on strike, there's nothing for you guys to do. You guys are sitting around with your hands in your pockets. You guys aren't getting paid because nothing's moving off the boats. Then that material is not getting onto the trucks. And from the ports on the east and west coast, the truckers aren't moving it. Also, then with that truck, the cargo ship that ran into the bridge over, same thing. That shut down that port for, I think, 30 days. And I think it was estimated something like $10 billion in lost revenue from that. So that affected truckers as well because nothing was moving. So it seems like this is all a big ripple effect. Something happens within this supply chain. Everybody's going to get affected, from the longshoremen striking. Truckers aren't making money. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. As far as like the longshoremen strikes and things like that, there were still guys lining up to take those loads.
But there's no loads because they can't get it off the ship.
So there were loads. There weren't. It wasn't business as usual. But there was still, you know, there was still product being unloaded from the ships, just not
As
on the
fast,
as
probably.
fast on the average. And then those companies also, they'll hire subcontractors in, non-union guys and things like that, who will take the product off the ships, put them in vans and ship them out. But again, that comes down to rates. They're willing to work for less than what everybody else is willing to work for. So they didn't make very many friends doing that. And there were a lot of drivers, a lot of foreign drivers that were lining up at the ports, saying, okay, well, there's a strike. These companies won't take these loads, but I'll take the loads. The mindset of a lot of these companies are break even. If they could break even and maybe make a little bit of money, they're happy. That's a problem. Because again, as a driver, if you're full-time, you don't have a family and things like that, you live on your truck. So you don't have you don't have to pay bills at home. You don't have to worry about those things. So as long as you keep the truck running, make a couple bucks, for food and things like that, you could stretch it out and survive for a few months. And that's what a lot of guys were banking on, that they'll stay on the break-even route for as long as it takes for the other guys to fade out, go out of business, and then they could scoop up those contracts, that type of thing.
So that didn't happen.
Not really. A lot of guys did go out of business, but a lot of people were able to push through. I really think the biggest issue in the freight industry right now is just cheap freight. That's what it comes down to.
But part of that cheap freight is because we have people from outside of the country coming in here and competing against us, maybe paying wages to these drivers from other countries at a cheaper price, and then, still making money that you can't make on your own. But other than maybe regulation with the e-logs and maybe dealing with some of these foreign countries doing business in this country, competing against the American countries, what other things are going on with regulations that are beneficial or not beneficial to you? Is there anything?
Not off the top of my head, really. I mean,
And what about, what about the strength of the union?
the Teamsters Union?
Yeah. Because it would seem if it was strong, the scabs, as you will, as you'd say, coming in, undercutting everybody, or just doing the work for the lowest bottom price, that wouldn't be happening too much.
The Teamsters Union used to be very influential and powerful. I'm not saying they aren't. I'm not saying they don't wield power right now, but they're not anywhere near what they used to be years ago. Personally, I'm not a fan of unions. I want to do my own thing. I don't like being told what I can and what I cannot do, where I could run, what I could take, who I could run for, how much I need to get paid. I want to make my own decisions, which is why a lot of people drive trucks in the first place. You know, you're out there, you make your own rules. You're your own boss, you know, the captain of your ship, so to say. There's pros and cons to unionization and all of that, but personally, I'm not a union guy.
You know, when you were talking about the Port of Baltimore issue, and a lot of guys would come in, owner-operators, and say, well, I'm not in the union. I'll go ahead and take that haul for a very low price. I would say the strength of the union, it wouldn't, if that's happening, then there's no reason to be a member of the union because you couldn't do that, right?
Yeah.
So the strength of your union depends primarily on if that actually exists, if there are people willing to undercut and do it for less. So when you're saying that to me, I'm thinking, then why would there be a union? How strong can it really be if people are don't have to be in the union and still can make a buck driving? And why would anybody want to waste paying union fees if there's people out there doing that?
Part of that is what doesn't make sense to me. You know, because you're always going to have competition. You're always going to have guys that are willing to race to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether the union says yes or no, either way, if they're willing to run and break even, they're going to do it. You know, nobody's going to stop them. I guess the pros to unionization is trying to get a set rate per mile, or trying to regulate the cost of diesel and things like that across the board, medical care and dental and vision and all things like that. But for the most part, again, if you want to be an owner operator, there's a reason, and the reason is you're your boss. You're not at the whim of what the union president or 500 other people say they want. That's what it really comes down to there.
So given all this that you've covered and so forth, do you still think that the industry has a lot of positives to it, or it needs a lot of change and help right now?
I definitely think there's a lot of positives. Absolutely. Again, it depends on the type of person you are. Me personally, I'll be 37 years old. I have a wife and kid. I don't want to be gone 5 weeks, come home for 5 days. The first day home, you sleep all day because you're tired. The day before you leave to go back out on the road, you sleep all day because you're trying to reserve some energy, so you're seeing your family or friends or whatever the case for 3-4 days out of the month. The money's great, but it's just, it's the trade up.
The home life suffers.
Home life is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, and then as far as, life expectancy for drivers is like 66 years old, something wild like that, Most drivers aren't married. Most drivers have no family. They have no friends. What's the point of having a couple $1 million in the bank if you're sitting on a truck, or even if you go home, you don't have anybody to enjoy it with or anything like that. That's why I think for younger people that haven't started a family yet, they could be gone for a while, 21, 22 years old. I think it's great. Absolutely great. Because they can make really good money.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not sacrificing the rest of their life. They're not sacrificing home time with family and things like that. Or again, if you're older, and you want to take your wife with you, take your husband with you, or even, if you're just by yourself, you run, you see the country, you get paid a little bit, you don't have any overhead, you sleep on the truck, all you have is your food. So the positives, I think, for a younger demographic and for an older demographic. For middle age, I don't think it's worth it personally.
Mm-hmm. I want to throw some questions at you in a kind of a rapid fire manner, and give me some answers. So, what's the longest route you've ever driven, and how many states when you get away from the mic, that's what happens. What's the longest route you've ever driven, and how many states did you cross?
The longest route that I've ever driven
can't be more than 3,000 miles.
Yeah, it's
be
it's
in the
just
water.
coast to coast.
Have you done a 3,000 mile?
I've done all 48 states in the mainland. I haven't been to Hawaii and Alaska. That's it. Yeah, I mean, when I drive, I drive. There's no breaks. There's you have your mandatory 30-minute break, and you have to get fuel, of course. You get hungry. But I'm, like we were discussing earlier, there are foreign companies that will run 30 hours straight. Would I be able to do it? Probably. Have I done it? I'd rather not
No
say.
sleep. Are you talking one guy, no sleep?
One guy, no sleep.
30 hours? You can't do that.
Like 38 hours. But
I don't think that's physically possible.
It's possible.
it's
Wow.
absolutely
So-
possible. Absolutely possible.
Well, and like you said, God forbid you hurt anybody. You're in deep shit.
Oh, yeah.
Coffee or energy drink, what is your rocket fuel? And you've already answered it. I'm looking at it on the table here.
Yeah, both for the most part, but I prefer energy drinks. On the road, you'll end up drinking 8 to 10 a day, easily.
That's got to be good for you.
Oh, it's probably the most beneficial you could, of anything health wise.
And if you got one of those cabs, you can have your coffee maker going in the back.
Yeah, which I did. I had a Keurig in the back. Absolutely.
What is your most unusual cargo that you've ever hauled?
Sailboat fuel.
Have you ever hauled any hazardous material?
I did not do hazmat. I don't have a hazmat endorsement. You're allowed to carry a couple 100 pounds. I think it's up to 1,000 pounds of hazmat, but I didn't.
What I want to really know is
that.
where they carry or who would haul it, and where do they bring those like the really hazardous stuff, like the used nuclear fuel rods or like the really dirty diapers. Where do those go?
I have no idea.
Right.
No idea.
What is this truck stop meal you could never forego, or you never get tired of?
Truck stop food is terrible. There's nothing that you want to bring as much with you as possible, so you could cook yourself. But there's a KFC buffet. I can't remember exactly where it was. I've never seen a KFC buffet before, but that was good. But for the most part, you don't want to eat on the road. You don't want to eat gas station hot dogs.
I think that's the answer right there.
Yeah.
Is there a trucking movie that actually has ever gotten it right?
I just saw a movie the other day called The Ice Road, I believe, with Liam Neeson. That was a pretty good movie. But other than that, it's hard to show what it is like without actually experiencing
So
it.
Smoking a Bandit really doesn't cut it. With the gorilla and there's no.
There would no, it's not really
Okay, just
accurate.
if Dillon wasn't trucking / brokering, what would Dillon's dream job be?
I've done so many different things. At this point, I'd probably go back to Wall Street. Yeah, I was on Wall Street for a while, so.
Were you in one of the markets? Like on the floor?
No, I wasn't a trader. I was at J.P. Morgan.
Okay. What is one of the strangest or funniest things you've actually seen on the road?
Devil's Creek, Texas. I'm driving through Texas trying to find a fuel stop. I found a pilot Flying J. Pulled up there. There was no pilot Flying J. It was two, maybe from 1970 fuel pumps. Nothing anywhere within 100 miles. It was literally desert and just two fuel pumps. So was it weird or strange? Not necessarily. Was it awkward feeling and creepy?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Sounds like something out of a Stephen King movie.
It was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, hands down.
Automated and electric trucks, game changers or overhyped?
Automated trucks, I'm all for, absolutely. A lot of older guys will call it, a steering wheel holder because you're not, shifting through your 10, 18 speed. As far as electric trucks, I'm not a fan. I'm not saying that there's no benefit to them. We just don't have the infrastructure right now. We can't. You can't run OTR with an electric truck. You just can't.
What is one thing you never leave for a trip without when you were driving?
I would always take my dog with me. I would never go anywhere without my dog.
Actually, that was the next question. Have you ever had a pet or companion join you on a trip? Okay. Manual or automatic transmission?
I prefer automated. A lot of drivers will hate on me for that, but when you're running, shifting's not such an issue when you're on a highway, but when you start getting into urban areas and stuff like that, if you're tired, I just want to cruise.
What is the best trucking tool or app that you would suggest for any driver?
Good GPS. A good GPS made for trucks specifically, and paper maps. Don't ever trust your GPS. It's just giving you a general route, but you'll get yourself in a lot of trouble if you just follow a GPS blindly.
If your truck could have any custom feature, what would it be?
Personally, a bathroom.
Oh yeah.
Definitely a bathroom. Even if it's just sort of like a porta potty type of thing, because that's another problem with driving. For example, you're in Wyoming, it's winter, it's 3:00 in the morning, you need to use the bathroom, you're at a truck stop. Get up, get dressed, walk across the parking lot, go use a bathroom that's not always the cleanest. Middle of the night, you're tired. You don't want to deal with all that. So having a little porta potty type of thing I think would be the best thing to have on a truck.
Outside of the freaky gas station in the middle of nowhere, have you had any wild experiences or close calls on the road? Any wildfires, anything like that?
I mean, yeah, I've been through every type of scenario on the road. There's one area in Wyoming. It's between Laramie and Rawlings, where they'll shut the road down completely. 70-mile-an-hour winds. I met a couple guys at a truck stop, and the three of us, 3 different trucks, we decided to run the route anyway, with the road closed, which was kind of scary. There's a good amount of road rage that goes on the road. A lot of the car drivers, they don't like trucks. They think we're in the way.
Yeah, but in the end, with road rage, you win. Big fuck small, always.
Yeah, 100%. We don't just.
So to me, if I was a truck driver, there wouldn't be anything such as road rage. I win always.
Just go.
What's your guilty pleasure snack on long hauls?
Beef jerky. Beef jerky and sunflower seeds.
If you had to give your truck a name, what would it be?
I've never named a vehicle. So I'm going to say, because I watched that movie the other night, the Liam Neeson movie, he named his truck Truck.
Oh, my God.
That's what I would go with on that one.
And what's the one thing about the trucking industry you wish more people understood fully?
I wish people appreciated it more. People don't really consider how important trucks and drivers are. A lot of people think that we're uneducated. There's a lot of different misconceptions about drivers. But you take for granted everything. Literally everything that you touch has been on a truck, especially, during the pandemic, all these people hoarding toilet paper and things like that. You wouldn't have any toilet paper if it didn't come by a truck, so there were a lot of people, with the thank you truckers and things like that. That was great. But I wish people had a little bit more of an appreciation to drivers and the industry itself.
Okay.
Do you have any advice for people that are looking to get into the trucking industry? Or even into brokerage?
Yeah, stay positive. Absolutely stay positive. It's going to be a rocky road, no pun intended, sometimes. But if you stick with it, you should be all right. Don't get discouraged, And as far as driving, just drive. That's all it comes down to. A lot of people, they don't want to put the work in, per se. If you want to make money, you have to be driving. There's a saying, if the wheels ain't turning, you ain't earning. So that's basically it. Just get on the road and go. Don't expect to stop. Try to not think about your home life and things like that, and just run.
So if there was somebody that wanted to reach out to you and possibly have you as their broker, how would they get in touch with you?
We have the website, Facebook, all of that. I could leave.
If you just want to, you can just go ahead and say it on here if you have the website. If you don't know it, we can get it later.
I would have to ask my wife. Honestly.
Oh, okay. Now we see who's running things.
Yeah, exactly. My company is called Abruzzese and Company. Very original, of course. You just Google me. You could find me.
Okay. We'll have to look that up for ourselves. All right. We appreciate you for watching. We hope that you like this episode and that you go ahead and get some positive information on what's going on in the trucking industry and maybe appreciation for the truckers as well. We have to remember everything is shipped throughout the country. It comes in on boats or whatever, or maybe it's even produced here, but it has to be taken from that place where it's produced and delivered to wherever we pick it up in the stores or wherever we buy it from. Without that being shipped, there's nothing to buy. We can see this in Florida, especially when we have like a hurricane or something. The stuff that's in the stores goes out in like a couple of days or a day or less, and then we might take a while for it to come again, especially with Florida being a state that where it doesn't really ship a lot out, it ships most of the stuff in. Dillon said, a lot of drivers have to deadhead from Florida to somewhere else to pick up their next load. So Florida is in a different kind of situation than a lot of states. With that, if you liked this episode, please like and subscribe and comment. We hope that you watch more and that you give us any kind of information on what you want to see in the future as well. Thank you so much.